All right, so thanks so much for taking the time to do this. First question that I have for you is tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the realm of accessibility.
Sure. Well, my name is Rachel Grossman-Kahn. I got into accessibility in a couple different ways. But first of all, I'm in Seattle, which I love living in Seattle, and I work for Best Buy. But I'm here today representing myself, not representing Best Buy. But I work as an accessibility designer on their accessibility team, so making sure that the website and the app are even more than compliant, are at the minimum compliant, but also making a great experience for customers. So the way I got into accessibility, first of all, I had a lot of deaf friends growing up. And so I had learned ASL from like age 7 on and had friends that I learned ASL with, and then took ASL throughout high school and college, and then did a 2-year interpreting program after college. And interpreted. So I was very involved in the deaf community. And then I also specialized in deaf blind interpreting. And so I got familiar with the blind community. And then when I switched to UX, it seemed like a great way to combine my backgrounds of, working with ASL and with the deaf community, the deaf blind community, and then being a designer. So combining those. Meanwhile, around the same time that I was transitioning into UX, I developed a disability myself. So I'm bipolar and I have an anxiety disorder, and I've had those my whole adult life. But maybe around 6 or 7 years ago, they got really, really severe where it was impacting my life, where I couldn't work for 2 years. And I went through just a really hard time with treatments for it. And so in the end, I ended up getting a service dog, a psychiatric service dog to help me. And then feeling like I actually identified with being part of the disability community, not just, as an ASL interpreter or as a designer in accessibility, but also as a member of the community myself. So now I'm super, super passionate about accessibility, just to help my community and to help people like me. So yeah, I love doing what I do.
Hmm. My next question is, what's the day-to-day like and what sorts of things do you do in the accessibility realm? I also understand that you work with a lot with UX, so if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. At Best Buy, so I'm on the accessibility team as a UX designer. One thing I do is I look at designs from all designers across all teams at Best Buy. So for the app, for the website, any physical 3D products that are being built. And I take a look at the designs, and then I hold office hours and give all the designers feedback on how to make things accessible. So it could be as simple as, we need to change the color, make the color contrast more, or more complicated things like, you know, uh, where's the button going to go? How's the screen reader going to work with the order of, everything moving through the screen reader? How is that going to work? So I also mark up annotations, which are notes for the developers on like the reading order of how the screen reader is going to read the page, or is this a button? Is this a link? Roles and things like that. And then another thing I do at Best Buy is I spread or kind of evangelize accessibility across the company. So I will lead workshops. I will lead accessibility talks where we bring in, we recently brought in somebody who was deaf and blind. So I helped co-lead a workshop, or I guess an accessibility chat with him. So we bring people in with disabilities to talk about their experiences and also how they interact with technology.
Hmm. My next question is, when it comes to like designing something that is accessible with with like UX or like I'm sure you've heard of universal design. How do you sort of what sorts of methods do you use to like figure out, you know, is this accessible? How can I make it accessible?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we do, what's really important is, working with people with disabilities, not just like trying to design for people with disabilities. So I think like that's a huge part of it. So I know that like, apart from Best Buy, I've worked on a lot of freelance projects, and I always, before I take on a project, like take a look at like who's leading the project. So I make sure that like, a person with that disability is the one who, is behind the project, so that I make sure that we're getting an accurate representation of who our users could be. And it's not just me making an assumption of what I think somebody who's blind would need, or I think somebody, who is in a wheelchair would need. So that's really important, is to bring in people from that user group to not just give feedback, but to also design it with you. So being co-designers.
Mm-hmm. So like my follow-up, I guess, is like, do in order to sort of recruit people with disabilities to try out these u accessibility design interfaces and pro features, if you will, what goes into sort of the recruitment of like, to try accessibility services? Do you reach people out in Washington State? What goes into that?
Yeah, I'm not as involved in recruitment. I know that one thing we've done is we've set up a screener that can ask. So when we are sending out, using like UserZoom or some other big platform, we send out a bunch of screener questions that will screen. One thing that's hard is you can't ask somebody like, do you have a disability? That's sort of not appropriate. So we can ask, what kind of accommodations do you use? Do you use any accommodations? And so that's one way to ask people if they're disabled without actually asking if they have a disability.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what have people said, in trying products out that feature UX or accessibility features? What have you heard from customers?
I mean, on all different projects, you hear a lot of different things. One really cool project I worked on was called Do Not Pet Me, and it was for service dogs. And it was basically redesigning the vest for service dogs. And I did this while I was in grad school. And so what we did is we recruited, well, so it kind of goes back to your earlier question, but we recruited just basically through social media for people. We decided to focus on service dogs that for seeing eye dogs. And the feedback we got when we eventually built our prototype and tested it with people is we met people at coffee shops who had service dogs, and we put the prototype on their dogs. And people were really happy with it. What we were trying to solve the problem was basically like, people very often will come up and pet service dogs. And I know that's a huge problem because like I had a service dog for several years until he retired. And people will often just come up and they reach out for your dog or they pet. So we came up with sort of all these fun ideas of like how can we discourage people from petting without the emphasis having to be, or the importance having to be, on the person who has the service dog, because maybe they don't want a confrontation, maybe they don't want to put energy into like telling every single person not to pet. So we came up with some ideas like making a vest that was spiky, right? So nobody would like want to pet the vest because it like has spikes. And that was kind of a silly, like, just any kind of idea. But when we ended up testing it, the people who we tested with who were blind really liked that they didn't have to take any action, that we had a vest that automatically announced when someone would lean towards the dog to pet it. It had a sensor and it would say, "Do not pet me." And so it would announce it really loudly, so that again, the person who was blind didn't have to say that. So yeah, we got a lot of really positive feedback, and people asking like, when is this going to be available for purchase? People enjoying trying it with their dogs. So yeah, we get a lot of good feedback like that.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what impact does UX, accessibility in general, have on the sort of greater community? How what how and how is that important? Why is that important, basically?
Yeah, I mean, UX is so important. It's all about the user's experience. And I'd say like something that's really cool about UX is that when you design for like somebody with a disability, you actually are designing for everybody. So people can benefit from accessibility features, even people who are not disabled. It's kind of like great that you're helping people who are, assisting people who are disabled and assisting people who aren't. So like a sidewalk curb, right? Like maybe those were designed for people with wheelchairs so they could get up, up the curb. But then it's also good for people with bikes. It's also good with parents with strollers. So I really like that with UX. You can invent solutions and you can try to focus on a group, but you end up inventing something that is good for everybody.
Mm-hmm. To kind of wrap this up, what can people take away from this conversation? How can UX how can people like designers, peop engineers, if you will, how can those people sort of implement UX design tools, strategies to better, make things more accessible for people with a variety of disabilities?
Yeah, I think it all starts with empathy. I think you want to understand your user and you want to care about your user. And I think that something that I suggest whenever somebody joins our team or is new to accessibility and is interested in it, I suggest like going out and volunteering in the disability community. And so just spend some time like you could volunteer at like Lighthouse for the Blind or like other organizations, and just so you start to build some empathy and you want to learn from the people again, like with disabilities. You don't want to just make assumptions. So I think like really the biggest part of like before you're even implementing your design and coming up with your design is just making sure that you really understand your user and are making efforts to collaborate with your user. I think that's the most important part.
Yep, cool. All right.